Mr. Guha, Professor Gurukkal, we are deeply grateful to have you, both of you with us this evening to speak about the book and its significance today.
Dr. Ramachandra Guha, Keerti, Mrs. Esther Ananthamurthy, Keerti, Vivek Shanbhag, and distinguished audience. I'm really privileged to do this function. It's really paying homage to Ananthamurthy, and I would go emotional if I go autobiographical about my relationship with URA, so that I can't do now. Now, I have been in close contact with Ananthamurthy's writings, and until his last breath, I have been getting recharged through conversations with him. Every time when I used to feel some kind of academic fatigue, I would immediately decide to visit him. And any topic that you open up, URA has a totally different approach. Now, consciously or unconsciously, we would be running into problematics of binaries. You join either side, you can see URA as a critical insider in that. That has been some kind of a very strange experience, and then that used to open up new questions, new ways of approach, and so on. If you talk about authoritarian rule, then he would prefer to be a critical insider in authoritarian rule rather than valorizing anarchy. If you talk about anarchy, then again he is a critical insider in anarchy. So he has been creatively and intellectually negotiating between all binaries. And in this book also we can see plenty of such instances where he is taking positions at unexpected points and in the least expected manner. As you all know, he has been always writing with utter impatience towards misrule within democracy. He never used to be away from the kind of democracy that we have been experiencing during the post-colonial days, saying that this is bourgeois democracy, as Marxists would say, or the least appreciable kind of democracy, as the liberals would say. But he would remain within democracy and see what could be done for transforming the existing system into democracy. That has been his approach. I think that was part of his life as well. He remained in orthodoxy and then fought against it. He never opted out of it. He never opted out of anything and always tried to distinguish between being and belonging. He would criticize something by belonging to it. He wouldn't be an outsider and then would criticize. He would first establish that he has a legitimate right to belong to it. And then he would start criticizing. Sometimes criticism would become traumatic and fundamental, which would even go to the extent of denying that. But at the same time, he would very vitally reposition himself in the same thing, but the thing that he criticized would get reconstituted in an entirely different way. That kind of an exercise, creative exercise, intellectual exercise, you can enjoy throughout the book. Now I remember once I translated a small poem of one of his friends in Kerala, Kadamanetta Ramakrishnan. He passed away. He wrote a poem, Kirata Vrittam. And URA was very curious to know about striking metaphors. He used to ask me to point out where the poet is totally dissatisfied with the existing linguistic tropes, expressions. Now, is he really entering into a relationship of confrontation with existing metaphors, existing expressions? You just point out that. And also come out with some of the, improvised kind of metaphors, some of improvised kind of linguistic tropes. So I remember, I strained at the least to translate one expression. The poet speaks about a savage, in the forest, in utter disappointment. He is looking at the sky and saying that my father is dead there. And then he looks at the valley and says, my mother is burnt. This forest. Forest is burnt, and then there is no sign of rain in the sky. And he is perching a torch burning on his chest. That's the way he is standing. Kirata is standing in that posture. And then there is a line expressing anger embedded in his eyes, for which the poet talks about a tiger with newborn cubs staying in his eyes. That's the way he tried to express it. But then URA wanted to hear that in Malayalam. Eettappuli pettukidakkum eeran kannu chuvannum. It's red eyes. And you can see in the two eyes, Eettappuli, this tiger with newborn cubs. Tiger with newborn cubs are staying in his eyes. So that is the best expression of anger. This poet used to quarrel with existing metaphors. For example, one day I had to translate a line from the poet who talks about the evening. Normally poets sing in praise of evenings and they have no end to celebrate evening. But this poet talks about evening as a dead body crawling towards the detached head. അറ്റ തലയ്ക്ക് നേരെ ഇഴയുന്ന ജഡം പോലെ അസ്തമിക്കുന്ന സന്ധ്യ. An evening which is going to end, and then the evening, that red color and all, that is exciting a passion of a totally different kind in the minds of the readers. The poet is speaking about Sandhya, the evening, eve, as dead body separated from the head is crawling towards the head. So you may be conceiving sun here as the detached head, and then the whole shadow as the dead body tainted with blood crawling towards the head. That kind of experiences I used to have. And I unfortunately could not read and appreciate his Kannada writings, although I can read Kannada, but very slowly. And then he used to tell me that, Rajan, language we acquire, literature we learn. So you may be able to learn literature that you can do through translation as well. But now you cannot acquire the language. Some of the burning themes in the poems, in the work, have been constant objects of his worries, I would say. And as he used to combine the odd things, or as he used to combine the opposites in one, he used to ask me about the expression of the Kirata, the savage in the forest in utter disappointment because of the lack of rain and also deforestation and drying up of the river and all that. And also through mining and misuse of the landscape ecosystem, involving in relocation of the Adivasis and all sorts of such problems, and then embodying the whole thing in a single individual and then talking about the anger of that person. So the poet I was referring to talks about the tears getting formed in the eyes of the Kirata, the savage. And the eye drops come out as fire drops. That he liked very much. And then I used to feel every time when he opened up issues where you are in total predicament, you do not have a way out. And there he has anger and then a priestly kind of, a prophetic kind of peace inside. Anger with peace as its critical insider. So when I talked about this falling of fire drops from the eyes, he used to say that, that I don't like, that's not a good expression. Because fire drops cannot sustain tear drops. But after reading this book, I could see URA with extreme level anger, and I really experienced the way he was making a rush about doing the work, straining at the least to complete the text. I see URA with eyes red, which he never used to be, and fire drops coming out. He was in that kind of tension, I would say. There's no word to express that. It is combination of anger and peace. And that he used to discuss always. How to articulate this? Articulate the totally incompatible two things. I remember once we discussed, that's very much part of this narration, state. We used to discuss how Marx defined the state, how Gandhi understood the state, and how one can modify the state, and so on. He would go well with the historical context of the coming into being of state. And as most of you know, that the context is that of selfishness, selfish individuals, selfish, self-seeking, cunning, egoistic, brutal, and aggressive. That's what Thomas Hobbes said. Because of these properties, his, also her, life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, and therefore state. A state has to, according to URA, in fact, not to put a stop to this, but to mediate this. How state will be successful in mediating these antagonistic properties? How can state mediate? Now, URA would say that state would take up punitive measures to suppress selfishness or to suppress a self-seeking, cunning, egoistic, and brutal kind of subject. But punishment is no remedy. Although punishment is a need like the state, punishment is no solution. That's what he is arguing in the book. Now, people are subjected to nasty, brutish, and short kind of life. And civilization norms and then juridico-political institutions are there to extricate people from dynasty level. But it's not easy to do that. It's not possible. But the Leviathan kind of state was the answer for Hobbes. URA would resist that. But if you argue for a Machiavellian kind of state, URA has certain points in favor of a Machiavellian state, provided you have an enlightened subject inside, an enlightened citizen inside. So like that, he would go on opening up new areas, and that is the reason why I'm saying I used to get myself recharged like a battery that lost its charge. And very often I used to tell him that, and that subject itself would be sufficient for him to open up a discussion where you would be really converted into knowledgeable. Some of such instances were reminded of when I passed through certain passages. One portion I'll just read out. As Keerti pointed out, the first section, which is structured in the form of aphorisms. And I remember how fascinated he used to be when we discussed Panini's Ashtadhyayi. Now, Panini has been now an amazing figure in world linguistics because of his thoroughness in articulating the underlying principles and also underlying and significant about the text. And Indian traditional articulation of knowledge has been in aphoristic style, sutras. That starts from the Shat Sutras, the Shikshakalpa, Nirukta, Chandas, Jyotisha, Vyakarna, 6 sutras. And we have the continuation of that till 18th century. This was sustained more or less an integrated epistemic property of knowledge production in India. There is no surprise in URA resorting to aphoristic structure when he is really trembling in balance to articulate certain things. The first selection of his mother tongue, that solved part of the problem. And then as a creative writer, he could really overcome the problem there. Now then to communicate, and it should be precise, and naturally aphoristic structure came in. So in the first chapter, he has some 29 sutras. The way he is examining Savarkar's Hindutva and then the historically contingent Hinduism. And also Savarkar's political philosophy and then Gandhi's political philosophy. Savarkar is constructing a nation and Gandhi is trying to dismember it into self-sufficient village-level republics. And always he used to point out how Gandhi was trying to mediate between the incompatible. Gandhi was anarchic, but at the same time, he never followed Marx's explanation of the withering away of the state. And URA agreed with Gandhi in believing that state, of course, is an evil necessity, but we should make it in such a way that a village republic becomes possible, and the conduct of the republic at the village level is not affected by the state. And As Gandhi believed that it would be impossible for human societies to get rid of state, state would be there. But it is better to see that the state is minimized in its own structure and function. That is possible only when you think in terms of microcosm of the state which is autonomous. There is no question of relative autonomy and then allowing the state, which according to URA was really a conceptual contradiction. When you talk about relative autonomy in a centralized structure, you're making a conceptual contradiction there. If there is centralization, then autonomy is ruled out. There is no relative autonomy and then centralization of the state. There he agreed perfectly with Gandhi in believing that state would phase out, leaving the face of its own to small village republics. He is bringing in Hind Swaraj concepts in the context of ours. I'll refer to that and then stop. Our context, as you know, is that of techno-capitalism, where state has only a crony capitalist role to play. State cannot exist in its autonomous juridico-political stature. State is just a tool in the hands of capitalists. And in the case of India, Ambanis have already converted the Indian state into mere tools in the hands of the corporate houses. And people are not aware of that. And that was the major tension of URA, how to educate people, how to make people knowledgeable about this. He doesn't speak political economy, he doesn't go into the issue in terms of this capitalism or that capitalism. Whether you are discussing knowledge economy or techno-capitalism, whatever, he is a way of his own creatively negotiating with all these aspects of reality and would reach out the slum or the bottom of truth. That was his success, and that in miraculous speed. And the present day situation is that of a crony capitalist state where we find the state siphoning hard-earned public revenue in a recklessly extravagant manner for the development of for the development of capitalism. The old Prime Minister, Manmohan Singh, addressed the women of the country talking about the constraint that he had to put a hike in the cooking gas price. He was referring to the trouble that the government was having. He mentioned 1,85,000 crore rupees as the money he had to divert from public revenue for maintaining controlled price. But at the same time, the same government was diverting 1,87,000 crore rupees for maintaining subsidies of the special economic zones. That he did not mention. And URA said that this is the success of democracy in India. You don't allow people to know certain things and then you make them emotional by talking about certain things as if the government is disclosing everything. On the one side, the Prime Minister is straight away talking about the difficult situation of India at that time. Now it is 2.7. Now Modi is not talking about that. And there is no need of it because people are not requiring it and people won't understand as well. This was the confusion or tension that URA was facing. You talk about various things, but you are ignorant of the way public money is being looted by the corporate houses. How many of us really know the way Assets Reconstruction Company is functioning in the country? Assets Reconstruction Company of Reliance is entrusted with the responsibility of collecting the long-standing loans. These are soft loans which are coming back to the lender in the normal course, but there is an assets reconstruction company, and the contract is 80% will belong to you and 20% belong to the state. This is real looting. Company is given business by the state. People do not have any idea about it. How assets reconstruction company is working, what is its business, is not stated anywhere. URA has his own ways of going deep into such issues and very quickly communicating the deleterious impacts of such practices. So what we in academic language talk about the crony capitalist state, and then the impossibility of the sustenance of democracy in that kind of a setup, and also the theoretical issues discussed long ago, that you will have imperialism as the highest form of capitalism, Lenin's thesis. Rosa Luxemburg debated this issue. Marx himself, writing on Sepoy mutiny in India, he published an article in New York Tribune talking about how democratic state would become impossible in democracy at a certain point of time. A capitalism and democracy cannot go hand in hand. These are mutually incompatible factors, and we are experiencing that. And now, transnational structures have emerged. You don't find democracy anywhere. Is IMF a democratic body? Is World Bank a democratic body? All bilateral bodies are anti-democratic. And there is transnational neo-imperialist structure which is having hegemony today, although we are not experiencing the impacts in objective terms. Or in other words, we haven't been able to objectively realize that these consequences belong to a structure like this. But Negri and Hart and so on had talked about it, but we haven't seriously thought about the so-called neo-imperialist structure. But URA once talked about, we started discussion with the electronic city in Bangalore, but he ended up with the issue of converting youth into robots. In his own expression, these robots would eat, drink, and reproduce. The youngsters are converted into apathetic youth, like robots, and they are the needs of the corporate system. They have huge experimentalist establishments where these youngsters, brilliant ones, are recruited, and Indian institutions can only train the youngsters and transport them or export them to these experimentalist institutions where they are teased, frustrated, and exploited. That's going on. And this new kind of exploitation, he used to ask, where are the Marxists now? What may they means these days? You have an unseen kind of setting where exploitation of labor is going on. This is not easily detectable. You cannot easily understand it. You need an analytical device to access the kind of exploitation which is going on, how youngsters are subjected to a ruthless confiscation of creativity, ruthless confiscation of their innovativeness. That's going on. And that is becoming possible in what URA used to say under the situation of electronic sophistication. But political economists would talk about techno-military, neo-imperialistic situation in which democracy is breathing last, and the most brilliant ones, even drawn from the villages, are subjected to ruthless exploitation of what? Of their creativity, innovativeness, and then getting that transformed into patents and intellectual property rights and so on. So that is the context which this book is reminding us of. He is not going into the details, but the power of his narrative is And it's a brilliant translation. And I used to feel that URA would have translated this in English exactly as Keerti construed it. She picked up the way he used to construct. He never used to write sentences having words more than 14, 16. Normally, his average level would be 12 words in a sentence. And it's packed with ideas. Each sentence can speak a lot of ideas, and ideas can grow in the mind of the readers. The free signifier which allows a thinking mind to generate ideas. Thank you very much.